Good afternoon, everyone, or whatever time it is for wherever you are. My name is Paula Dinnerstein. I am the president of the board of Beyond Pesticides, and I am welcoming you to this 41st, National Forum Series of Beyond Pesticides. Our theme this year is Imperatives for a Sustainable Future, Reversing the Existential Crises of Pesticide-Induced Illness, Biodiversity Collapse, and the Climate Emergency. And Beyond Pesticides and our speakers today have been in the forefront of tying together these interrelated global emergencies, and even more importantly, of proposing solutions for them. That includes our speaker today, Dr. Felix Löwenstein, who is a farmer and agronomist in Germany, who will be able to speak to how getting away from petrochemicals and using organic farming can address these crises. I want to ask you all to stick around. We will have a Q&A after his presentation, and then we will have a roundtable discussion, which will include farmers, organic farmers, marketers, and advocates, as well as including audience participation. So please join us for that, which will happen from 3 to 4. And then I also wanted to remind you that the second in this series will be occurring on Thursday, November 14th, with speaker Tracy Woodruff, who is a specialist in environmental health and particularly women's and reproductive health and how chemicals are affecting our health. So I hope to see you there soon. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jay Feldman, the Executive Director of Beyond Pesticides.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paula. Appreciate that. Welcome again. I am Jay Feldman, Executive Director of Beyond Pesticides. You know, our call to the Beyond Pesticides 41st National Forum, Imperatives for a Sustainable Future, is focused on two major goals. One, increase public understanding of the threats to human health and ecosystems and the dire consequences of inaction or measures that fall short. And two, urgent action to eliminate societal reliance on petrochemical-based materials in food production and land management, from farms to homes, gardens, parks, playing fields, and schools. The scientific literature tells us daily that our reliance on petrochemical pesticides and fertilizers is a major contributor to the current existential health, biodiversity, and climate crises. However, to many economists, investors, policymakers, and corporate leaders, these are just externalities of current chemical dependency, viewed as necessary to our quality of life. On the health crisis, what we are experiencing is painful and costly. The cancer in our families and friends, a range of adverse chemical-induced diseases, especially those triggered by endocrine disruptors with multi-generational effects. Biodiversity collapse, now looming, includes the decline in insect populations, including bees and butterflies, and deadly effects to ecosystems up and down the food web. Our waterways are threatened by the death of aquatic organisms essential to the aquatic food web. Without robust natural systems, we not only lose the beauty of nature, we suffer greater crop loss, less resiliency in the face of weather events, and declines in ecosystem services. On the climate emergency, dependency on petrochemical pesticides and fertilizers means the release of greenhouse gases and the failure to recognize the value of soil health in the drawdown of atmospheric carbon. We know from 60+ years since the publication of Silent Spring that these problems are not solved with a piecemeal approach, such as campaigns to ban individual pesticides and toxic chemicals. Our strategies at the local, state, federal, and international level require taking all these toxicants, pesticides, and fertilizers, taking them all out of use. They're antiquated, ineffective, driving insect and weed resistance, and expensive. This informs a sense of urgency. The bright spot, however, is organic. Those practicing and supporting this holistic ecological approach to land management have carved the path forward. We will hear today about the value of organic as a practical solution, what we must do to universally adopt organic across all land management, and recognize that defined, enforceable organic practices necessary to tackle the crises, the existential crises, is a social good, one that we must invest in for our future. Now, a program note, our keynote speaker will take questions after his talk, and then in the second hour, we will convene a roundtable. In both cases, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to send in questions. We're honored today to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Felix Löwenstein. Dr. Löwenstein is an agricultural scientist who has been on the forefront of organic in Germany, taking over management of his family's 400-acre farm in 1986 and converting it to organic in 1992. He has been a board member of Naturland, a global network of organic producers in 60 countries, working to merge organic and social principles. Dr. Löwenstein worked in agricultural development around the world. He was the chair of the Federal Association of Organic Food Producers in Germany for 19 years and currently serves on the board of the Research Institute of Organic Agriculture. He is the author of Food Crash, just released in the US, which carries the subtitle and the theme of today's strategic conversation: Why Organic is the Only Way Forward. Welcome, Dr. Löwenstein. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jay. It's really an honor for me to be allowed to speak to you right from over the ocean. As you might have seen here, it's already night here. And thank you for introducing me. You said rightly that I had been farming organically since 1992, and before 6 years, I did farm conventionally, like all the other farmers around me. And I only and when I switched over to organic, I knew exactly from own experience why I did it. And one of the experiences I had was that there's nothing that characterizes conventional farming as much as the use of nitrogen fertilizers and petrochemical pesticides. After all, there wasn't a square foot on my then 325 acres that I didn't treat with pesticides at least twice a year. And that's why it makes sense to pay particular attention to the effect these pesticides have on our health when they enter our bodies via the air we breathe or the food we eat, on the quality of drinking water because traces of pesticides or their metabolites can be found there, and on the state of biodiversity, which is influenced by the effect of these active substances. I am surprised, however, when I keep meeting people who only focus on one of these aspects that is related to their own professional orientation. They think that the other aspects only concern people of other disciplines. I tried to start my presentation. Oh, that could have been successful. Do you see what I have on the screen? Yeah.
Yes.
So sorry. So what is my talk today? It's about showing that this separation is not possible, that in natural systems, or to put it in another way, in ecosystems, there are a great many, indeed are unforeseeable, that technique, an unforeseeable number of cross connections. And I will explain this to you using a few examples on how pesticides work in ecosystems. And in the second part of my presentation, I will talk about the consequences this realization must have for the way in which we use our land and produce our food. The fact that the state of biodiversity worldwide is miserable no longer needs to be explained to anyone. The scientific evidence is devastatingly clear. Nevertheless, most people do not realize that something is happening there that is having just as dramatic an impact on the habitability of our planet as climate change, and that the two phenomena are mutually reinforcing. The WWF has just published another alarming report, the Living Planet report, just a couple of weeks ago, which quantifies the decline of wild vertebrates. According to the report, the number and diversity of vertebrates has shrunk by almost 3/4 over the last 50 years. In Germany, the general public understood what was at stake for the first time when an evaluation of the loss of insects was published in 2017. Volunteer insect researchers had set traps in nature reserves in northern Germany over a period of 27 years. The flying insects caught there were weighed regularly, and the result was highly alarming. During that period, the insect biomass decreased by 76%. It was only later that I found a study showing that this development did not just start a quarter of a century ago. Insects were also caught here at the University of Kiel between 1950 and 1980. In this case, it was ground beetles in wheat fields. The picture shows what could still be found after 30 years. Please let this picture sink in and realize the baseline for the loss of flying insects described above will not have looked like this, but like this. I have actually come across agricultural colleagues who didn't want to see what the problem was. We want to harvest wheat in these fields, not breed beetles. What these people didn't understand is that insects are nothing more than just a section of food webs, of food chains. It is therefore not surprising if also the birds of the agricultural landscapes, of the same agricultural landscapes, are declining dramatically. What you see here are common species that were still found in large numbers in the countryside when I was young. You can see that the decline is continuing from the red numbers, which come from a study published later. And you can extrapolate what you see here with the birds right down to the smallest microbiome in our soils, which is so small that you cannot even see it with the naked eye, but ultimately also in the other direction. And that is the part of the food chain at the end of which we humans sit. Please let us be clear. This development has many causes. Climate change is one, and particularly the ever-increasing size of fields and the reduction of structural elements in our landscapes. But the fact that pesticides play an important role in this process is a simple result of what they are made for. They are substances, they are substances that are made to kill living organisms. You don't have to portray it as drastically as in the advertising that Syngenta published for its insecticide karate in German trade journals. By the way, halali is the call with which hunters set off to hunt. I have to admit that this took me many years to understand how complex ecosystems are. Long after my conversion to organic, how many interactions there are in them and how diverse the effects can be that arise when we intervene in them. I received a solid agricultural education at the Technical University in Munich. And like all my fellow students, I was convinced after graduation that it was impossible to survive as a farmer in a hostile natural environment without being led by both hands, by Monsanto, Bayer, Syngenta, and all the others. I suspect it's no different in the US than it is here in Europe. Continuing farmer training that takes place, especially in the winter, is essentially provided by the friendly representatives of these companies. And one of the things I learned back then is if it says on a bottle, this product is effective against aphids, then it's effective against aphids. Otherwise, it has no effect. Because if it wasn't like this, it would say that on the label. I said again, it took me years to understand that this is utter nonsense, that it is completely impossible that a substance that does not occur in natural systems, a substance to which the organisms in these systems, So why was I? I was to tell you what I did not have understood in that, what I understood much later. And that was that there are also effects of these substances on non-target organisms, which, by the way, is a term that did not appear in my studies. So it's only logical, but it has only long been scientific, but it has also been long scientifically been investigated. So this study here, this study here was able to show that the general decline in insects leads to pests reproducing better because they have less competition. This is an effect that you have probably already observed in yourself. If you are ill and have to take antibiotics, the competitive relationship in your digestive tract becomes unbalanced and you get diarrhea. It is therefore not unreasonable to assume that the increasing problems with organisms introduced through global trade, I'm talking about these invasive species, are also exacerbated and perhaps even caused sometimes by the fact that they find it easier to gain the upper hand when there's too little diversity and therefore less competition. This is why it is anything but absurd to see biodiversity as the immune system of our planet. Perhaps there's somebody here in the audience remembering the image of Pope Francis giving an address to the world in the pouring rain on Good Friday 2020 in the deserted St. Peter's Square in Rome. That's an image which is very memorable. But I remember one sentence of his speech even more intensely. He stated then, "We have boldly continued in the belief that we would always remain healthy in an unhealthy world." Or perhaps he could have said, in a world that we have made sick. And then he was describing much more than the connection between human and animal diseases, to which many people limit the term One Health. Rather, he expressed what planetary health stands for, that the health of the ecosystem in which we live is inextricably linked to our health. A study was also published in 2020 in Nature that makes this impressively clear. Scientists in Kenya investigated the effects of traces of pesticides in freshwater resources, streams, lakes, rivers, and so on. It is not surprising that in all cases where traces of pesticides were present, they found that the species spectrum had shifted. So it's not a question of whether such contamination kills a species. It's about something that takes place far below this threshold. One species has more problems with the traces, so it's weakened and is therefore displaced by another species that doesn't mind them. And fatally, here in that study, it was the same species that increased everywhere where even the slightest traces of pesticides were found in the water. It was a snail, which is the carrier of schistosomiasis. And this is not just any disease, but one that kills up to 300,000 people in Africa every year, a hidden killer. I assure you, there's no reason to believe that such a mechanism only takes place in Africa. On the contrary, only last week, there was a, is it shown here? No. Only last week, the journal Science published a new study that looks at precisely this question. Here it is. How do sublethal traces of pesticides affect insects? They did this for 1,100 pesticides, and their conclusion is exactly the same as mine, because it's simply so obvious. In particular, the effect of many different pesticide traces in combination and the effect of non-target organisms are so unpredictable that it is naive to believe that it is possible to rule out damage to the environment with our approval procedures. All this leads to the question that I announced for the second part of my presentation. What consequences do we need to draw for operating natural systems? I hope it has become clear to you that we have to see all the existing existential challenges we face as one: biodiversity, water quality, climate change, for example. And that the way we practice agriculture today contributes to this in many ways. But due to our limited time, please let me stick to agriculture in general and pesticides in particular. And allow me to summarize once again. Synthetic chemical pesticides are applied to all areas of conventional agricultural land several times a year. At least this applies to arable farming. They consist of active substances that are new to our ecosystems. And they have been developed only for the last 60 years. An evolution of these substances together with the organisms that form these ecosystems has not taken place. And these substances are designed to kill target organisms, but also have an effect on non-target organisms. By killing or damaging them too, or by selecting or causing some organisms to gain a competitive advantage over others. So such effects are unpredictable and so complex that it is impossible to take them into account in approval procedures. The conclusion is actually clear. We must stop introducing such substances in our natural systems. It's as simple as that. And I'm not talking about integrated pest management, which means applying as few pesticides as possible. I don't know what it's like in the US, but here in Europe, that's actually the legal standard. You're not allowed to apply any pesticides until you have taken all the crop management measures to avoid them. Talking of choosing robust varieties or diverse crop rotation. I say actually, because in widespread practice, not even that happens. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about phasing out synthetic chemical pesticides, and therefore I'm talking about organic farming. Yeah, pesticides are used there too, but they are mineral or natural, and therefore much more likely to be something that nature already knows. But even these organic pesticides are only applied to 6% of organically farmed land. And once again, I'm using figures from Germany. I don't know them for the US. Of course, I know that there are organic farms that simply replace conventional pesticides and conventional fertilizers, organic inputs, and leave everything else as it is. This can only be a very short stage on the long road to the goal, even if at least less harmful products are used. But the goal is stable systems. Let me explain what I mean by using this word. And I will tell you two examples. This here is a lovely landscape, you will certainly agree. The small church is many centuries old. And you can see apple trees around the church, above, left, right, below, apple trees. You have landscapes like this too. I was in one in Washington State a few weeks ago, and you'll find them everywhere because this is the way you can produce apples so cheaply. Because of the large area, you have economies of scale, you can afford expensive special technology, and the marketing infrastructures are geared towards this one value chain. That's very efficient and works perfectly. But the system is also very, very unstable. Not only because the fruit growers put all their eggs in one basket and get into existential difficulties if there are several years of poor harvest, or if, as recently in California, the reservoirs dry up and there is no irrigation water. This is economically unstable. But the system is also biologically unstable, because only very few varieties are grown that consumers know and that the trade therefore demands. Unfortunately, there's also these varieties are also particularly susceptible to disease. And secondly, the rootstocks on which the fruit rice is grafted are the same all over Europe, just one single genetics. Perhaps it's similar over there in the United States, I don't know. Maybe you tell me later. The fact that that you can only harvest apples that you can also sell if you go through at least 25 times a year with a plant protection sprayer. So after what I said in the first half, I don't need to explain what that means. Among other things, bees are disappearing. Isn't it insane that millions are actually being invested in the development of artificial bees to ensure the fertilization of flowers? What you see here is something that our farm had until half a century ago. Unfortunately, it's gone. I can't show you a picture of that. And our orchard was also there for marketing and generating income for the farm. But no one ever went there with a crop protection sprayer. Why was that possible? Because it was a stable system. Not one type of fruit, but several, not just one variety per species, but several healthy, resistant varieties. And I would thought that perhaps our ancestors still knew what had to grow under the fruit trees for apples, pears, plums, and like to do well. And in 2018, the already mentioned FIBEL, the Research Institute of Organic Agriculture in Switzerland, published a study on exactly that, how to make the orchard system more stable by growing beneficial plants under fruit trees. Because of course it works. All permanent crops in which the plants are grown year after year and cannot be rotated have a particular problem with pests. And that's why similar mixed crops are already being tested also in vineyards. My second example for stable system comes from the Philippines. What you see here is pineapple production on a huge area. And the system is just as unstable as the coconut production in the background, I guess. To be honest, I don't know how often you have to drive in here with the crop protection sprayer, but tramlines reveal that you cannot do without spraying either here. But it gets interesting when you turn around 180 degrees at the spot where I took this photo. Then you will see the operation of a typical Filipino small farmer. Typical because, like the vast majority of small farmers, he and his family only own about 4 acres of land. What is atypical, is how he cultivates it. As a proper farmer from the north, like me, the sight of so many different plants makes you want to tidy it up a bit. But then the man started to explain to me what is growing next to what and why. Which plant is good for warding off with pests? Which can be used to make medicine for humans or animals? Which plant will ensure the survival of the family if a hurricane destroys everything? Which type of rice is good for everyday life and which for festive occasions? And much, much more. I was really humbled. And that's when I realized what I was looking at. A perfectly stable system, both biologically and economically. And to top it all off, it is also highly productive. I need to explain that to you briefly. It's all down to the leaf area index. This index indicates how much square feet of leaf area there are per square foot of soil. The leaf area is responsible for the photosynthesis and therefore for the production of plant mass. And because plants only use part of the sunlight and some even thrive better in the shade, a high leaf area index leads to a high biomass yield. And in this respect, a system that starts at the top with a palm tree and has, avocado bushes, papaya, corn, many levels down to the creeper is superior to a system that only has the leaf area of a single plant species on one level. In addition, each of the plants has differently shaped roots, which in combination open the soil for nutrients much better than the roots of just one plant species can. What our Filipino friend is doing here is high science. It's high science because he knows exactly which plant has which requirements and thrives best in the vicinity of which other plant. According to him, over 90 different plants grow on his 4 acres. Most of his colleagues do not have this knowledge and grow monocultures on their tiny plots as they see on the large farms and as they are advised to do by agricultural consultants. However, this is actually ancient knowledge that has seemingly become superfluous due to the possibilities of our agricultural chemistry. In his 2,000-year-old natural history, the Roman writer Pliny the Elder describes the cultivation in North Africa at that time. It says, in the shade of the proud palm tree sprouts the olive tree, and under the olive tree, the fig tree, and under the fig tree, the pomegranate tree, and under the pomegranate tree, the vine, under the vine, the wheat, then the legume, finally, the leaves. All this in the same year, and all the plants are nourished, one in the shade of the other. I have a daughter who is an archaeologist who gave me that. Isn't it a beautiful description of a stable system that came about, that had to become about, because there were no pesticides back then. Now, you will object that in Pliny's time, slaves did the work, and that the annual income of farmers in the Philippines is so low that such a labor-intensive system works. You're right, of course. But I'm not saying that stable systems have to look the same everywhere in the world. On our farm, and this is the case on all well-managed organic farms, diversity is produced over time. Many different crops alternate in our fields over the years, crop rotation. In addition, between harvest and reseeding, if there's enough time, we sow diverse mixtures of legumes and grass, and in some crops we incorporate undersown crops into the main crops. But already works quite well. And when we have further developed artificial intelligence and robotics, then it will also be possible for us to learn a few things from the Filipino farmers that still take too much time and labor today. And that certainly would be more evidence of natural intelligence than the construction of artificial bees after we have destroyed the pollinators that nature has given us in such rich diversity. Let me show you an example on what this could look like. The indigenous people of the American continent developed a system wherever corn could be grown that must have been stable because it worked for over many years, maybe thousands of years. After all, it managed without the crutches provided by the chemical industry in our days and age. This system was called milpa and consisted of growing corn, beans, and pumpkin on the same land. The corn serves as a support for the beans, and the pumpkin grows well in the shade of the other two. We can practice this system already today with corn and beans. Then you just have to choose varieties that ripen at the same time, and then you harvest them with a combine and separate the grains through sieves. The only thing that doesn't work with pumpkins is that you have to remove them by hand from between the rows before the combine arrives. Couldn't pay for that labor. But what if we had small, autonomous, electrically powered machines that could carry the pumpkin out for us? I hope you have noticed that I'm not claiming that we have already created stable systems with organic farming as we practice it on the broad scale today. We are only on the way there. And we may never achieve the ideal 100% and still need pesticide interventions, even if only in a few places. And that's why it's good to have developed natural products that don't harm the environment. Our friend in the Philippines, who I told you about, also produces natural pesticides with some of the 90 plants he's growing. But these are usually more plant strengthening agents because they don't kill organisms, but strengthen the crop's defenses. Incidentally, during this visit to the Philippines, I met a vegetable farmer who told me something amazing. She doesn't work in her vegetable fields at a certain time in the afternoon. And this is because she had discovered that this is the time when the beneficial insects are out and about fighting the pests. That's what I call intelligence. Natural intelligence instead of artificial. Over many years, I have had the privilege of getting to know people all over the world who are already much further ahead than most of us. People who can show us where the journey is heading, how we can achieve truly stable systems and get rid of all the products from the chemical kitchen that are damaging our health and that of the planet. In India, entire states have set out to make their agriculture 100% organic. The largest is Andhra Pradesh. 55 million people live there, and they call what they have started in their natural farming, they call it natural farming. After just 7 years, a third of the farmers of that state are already doing it. I can assure you we still could learn a lot from them. Above all, however, that they make it clear that organic farming is not a luxury project for rich countries, but a solution to the problem of food security and the ecological crisis in equal measure. The question of whether the world can be fed with this form of agriculture, with organic, does not arise, not there, not here. Rather, the question must be, can we ensure global food security with agriculture, with an agriculture that has become the norm and which is therefore called conventional and is characterized by the high input of energy and chemicals? The answer is clear no. But I admit this answer cannot be justified just with a few words and a few figures. So this is why I wrote this book. That's now the advertisement sector section. I wrote it because the logic seems so compelling that only intensive chemical agriculture is capable of producing enough food for the global population. So what I am trying to explain to you is why this conclusion is not correct and why I'm convinced that only organic agriculture will be able to produce food security on the long run. You may want to disagree on this point and point out that there are other concepts, regenerative agriculture, for example, or climate-smart farming or agroecology, which would also or possibly be better able to do this. This is also a broad field and can hardly be answered in a few words. So here's just this much. All these concepts have focal points and ideas that enrich organic farming. Or to use the term, they can help us to make our agriculture more stable, ecologically, socially, economically stable. However, there's one crucial difference between these concepts and organic farming. They are not binding. There are no guidelines laid down in a law or agreed under private law at national or even international level. In other words, there's no precise description of what someone who wants to use this term for themselves may do or not do. These terms are therefore not protected. And that's why anyone can use them, those who are serious about it as well as those who think that a green coat looks good at them. And this has been happening for a long time already. Those who think that organic farming is becoming too important use such labels to create confusion. And those who want to keep their old business model but want to avoid criticism are doing the same. Big ag started doing this a long time ago. Like you see here, CropLife is hijacking agroecology. That's not only a shame because greenwashing deceives consumers, but also because the potential for innovation inherent in such approaches is discredited, which is a shame because we badly need to further develop our agriculture using regenerative methods. This applies in particular to the buildup of organic matter in the soil, which is in the center of regenerative farming. And building up organic matter is very crucial. Jay said it, it's a technology to fix carbon, which plants take out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis. And as we all know, there's already far too much carbon in this atmosphere. But also, carbon in the soil, so humus, has an important role for mitigating flooding because soils can better receive water and store water and retain water. And because of the last, it is very important for dry periods. So we are talking about both combating climate change and improving resilience to its consequences. So let me at least mention this. Also, the topic would need its own lecture. We also have to go further by turning entire landscapes into climate landscapes that help cool the climate. Too much for today. Therefore, let me state that if we want to preserve regenerative methods as a tool for stabilizing ecological systems, we must not leave them open to the risk of being used for greenwashing purposes. And that is why when I talk about regenerative or agroecology, I always add on the basis of organic farming. And I repeat once again, I consider organic farming to be anything but perfect. We still have a lot to develop and research. This also has to do with the fact that in the last decades, an incredible amount of money has been invested in research and development in chemical-based agriculture. In comparison, only homeopathic doses have been invested in research into organic farming. There's still a lot to be achieved. Just in most European countries, and probably more so in the US, incredible subsidies have flowed into conventional farming systems. Just think of the support of the production of ethanol from corn, but hardly anything has been done to develop organic farming. And this is why the role of the consumer is so important. Consumers can initiate a great deal through their purchasing decision, and as citizens, they can make it clear what they expect from politics. Because every transformation begins with pioneers. People who tread the path that has to become later the road for all the others. Farmers, food processors, retailers, and all of us as consumers. And pioneers don't just start when the data is perfect. So don't delay. Be pioneers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, your perspective is invaluable, and the experience that you've had, over your lifetime is both internationally and within Europe is incredibly informative and important. I hope we can keep Dr. Löwenstein on the screen.
Yes, I'm still here.
Yep.
I constantly have technical problems, but
okay,
yeah.
There you go. One of the questions we'll be talking about later, which I'd like to get your opinion on, is the investment that Germany and others in the European Union are making as a matter of federal policy in organic. This concept that we need to have some goals of transition, and we need to fund those goals. We don't have anything like that in the United States. And I'm wondering the process that led to that in Germany.
I mean, it started with something funny, because back in the end of the 80s, we had a big problem in Europe. We were producing too much, so the prices went down too much. So the idea was to finance or to subsidize organic farming as a means to decrease production. But it became clear very soon that this was also a measure to improve the state of the environment. Mm-hmm. So that's when the whole subsidy system for organic started, and it was in 1990 when the former private standards were being put into Europe-wide law standards. So since 1990, the organic standard is binding law. Yeah. And meantime, the support in many countries anyway has increased a lot. We have targets in many countries for achieving, for example, in Germany, 30% of organic in 2030, which is very ambitious, of course. And the European Union, in their European Green Deal, they had a target of 25%.
Yeah.
And we have countries like smaller countries, like the Scandinavian countries like Austria, which already go towards these percentages. In Germany, we're right now at 12% of the, or 11% of the land, something.
One of our participants has a question that's really focused on ecosystems and how we connect the health of the ecosystem or ecosystems to protection of the planet and particularly climate. How are you seeing farmers increasingly recognizing their value, the value that they bring in their land management practices to ecosystem protection, even in conventional systems? Is that something, are those dots being connected?
Yes, I think so. Even though you will still find farmers like the one guy who said we don't need beetles when we produce wheat. But you see a lot, even especially younger farmers, being very much intrigued by the concept of regenerative, and they understand that they have to do something about their soil. And I first understood that something like 3-4 years ago when I was invited to give a talk in a very remote area. I mean, what is remote in Germany? But where we came into something like a community hall, and then there were 900 farmers sitting there in order to spend an entire day to learn more about how to better treat their soil. So that encouraged me a lot. And as I said, I was to the United States a couple of weeks ago, and I met these two young farmers in close to Pullman, Washington, an area called Palouse. Huge fields, not a single green leaf around. And both, even though practicing on conventional farmers, both of them told me, we know that our system comes to an end, so we must go out for something new.
Yeah.
And that's why it is so important that organic farming has developed so much experience on the field of something new.
Yeah. I guess the question is, when we see those who are committed to a conventional system and integrating elements of organic, how do we move that to the next level? And maybe regenerative falls in the same conversation. I mean, as you said, there are beneficial elements associated with those who define themselves as regenerative land managers or farmers. But the fact that that is not a whole system that's where there's agreed upon definitions, there's an enforcement system, et cetera, means that we've got a hodgepodge of activities going on that are not necessarily achieving the level of system that is needed to really embrace organic. So how do you've got those 900 farmers in a room, they're concerned about soil health, they're not thinking of themselves as organic. How do you talk to them to move them to the next level of systems change?
You know, Jay, you know that famous thing, it's all about economy stupid.
Yeah.
It's not true. It's all about psychology stupid. And there's a lot of farmers. Of course, there's a lot of farmers trapped in their system because they have a huge piggery or something of that kind. But many farmers don't change their system because all their neighbors don't do it, and they don't want to be the ones who reproachfully do something else. But this is why it is so important, and that's one of the reasons why I appreciate so much the concept of regenerative, because it's a level where I can talk to my conventional colleagues. The only thing I don't want to have is a label regenerative, because it will cause confusion, and we will wake up seeing that this label integrates a lot of practices we do not want.
Yeah.
But the practices themselves are very much very good to have an issue to talk about with conventional farmers. And I'm very proud that in the last year of my term as the president of this umbrella organization for organic in Germany, we achieved to have a program together with the federal ministry where we try to find out techniques to increase soil carbon on 150 farms nationwide, half of them organic, half of them conventional. And these farmers are working together, and with science, of course, with institutes. They're working together to find out how they can improve their soil from where they are. So organic farmers are at a different stage than conventional farmers. But we all know that if it comes, for example, to organic soil building, the good conventional farmers are better than the bad organic farmers. So we can learn from each other. And as soon as we discover that, we can inspire each other. And I'm sure after the 6 or 7 years of that project, it might not be 150 to 150, but the numbers might have changed.
Yeah. And you may have mentioned this in your book, but Robert Rodale defined organic using the word regenerative. It is a concept that he raised decades ago as integral to organic. So let me ask you one last question, and so you can get back to the family. And thank you again for taking the time with us today. We are really honored to have you. You had the crop life slide up, and the influence that the industry has on terms that are used, co-opting terms, co-opting concepts. We had in the United States, for the longest time, Monsanto defining itself as supporting sustainable agriculture. And to this day, I mean, I've spoken to organic, or I should say regenerative farmers, who want to consider themselves climate smart, and they're farming GMO crops and using herbicides in a no-till system. But can you shed some light on whether Germany has struggled with this issue of corporate influence over policies and practices? Going back to the first question, which is, you did establish a goal. That goal presumably is threatening to an industry that relies on revenues from the sale of petrochemicals. I suspect many would argue in the United States that that's what's held us back, in the influence of corporations in defining policies that they see as adverse to their economic interests. What's the status in Germany in terms of the influence of corporations over public policy?
Of course, I mean, we do meet a lot of resistance from that corner, because there's a lot of money at stake, and if you have 11% of the surface organic, there's a lot of money lost. We have a statistical overview that says that organic farms spend on crop protection and fertilizing something like, I'm inventing the figure now, it's just for the relationship, 20 euro per hectare, and the organic farm and the conventional farm is something like 350 euro per hectare. So you see how much money we are talking of. But on the other, one thing is they are trying to discredit organic. The whole thing of organic cannot feed the world is one of the main arguments. That's why the book was written. And then they are trying. There's one very inventive way to fight organic. It's to lobby that the organic rules should be much more strict. because if they're strict enough, nobody will be able to do it. That's a very good scheme.
Yeah.
But Jay, let me finish with one thought. because I think it's so important. What it is all about is when we talk about genetic modification and all that, it's all about the question, how can we make the difference between progress and innovation? Because unfortunately, in the last 150 years, we had to find out that not every innovation ends up being a progress in the sense of making this planet a better place for humans and their fellow creatures. So the one conclusion I am drawing is that if you consider all the technologies that has us brought closer to the abyss, have all to do with getting away as much as possible of the functional systems, principles of natural systems. So the conclusion is, let's try to keep as close as possible to how nature works. And that brings us on the safer side. And just by chance, it gives us better food, a more lovely landscape, and better health. That's all in addition.
All benefits. And yes, we're concerned about humans and all our compatriot organisms out there in the environment, which makes up the ecosystem. So we've come full circle. And thank you. Wow, so inspiring. And congratulations on your book. I read it and said, wow, this captures where we need to take the conversation, at least in the United States and internationally. And I think it makes a tremendous contribution to having that conversation and moving change ahead. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I will stay for another half an hour just for curiosity, but then, as you said, my family is waiting for me, so I'll fade out clandestinely. Thank you so much. It was such a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Hope to meet you all in flesh and blood.
Oh, we'll meet soon. Okay, take care. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for all the attendees. I see we have a really robust group of folks from all over the country that are, working on these issues and concerned about how we can move things ahead in a way that protects us. So I'd like to now introduce the roundtable participants. Great. Thank you all. We have all the roundtable participants up on the screen, and what I'm going to do is introduce them, and they're going to give you a little wave so that you know who I'm talking about. I should say before starting, this reminds me of a meeting I was in with Senator John Tester years ago with a bunch of organic folks, some farmers, some policy folks. And one of his aides came in and said, "You have another meeting." He said, "That meeting can wait. I'm with my peeps." And so I feel like I'm with my peeps here having this conversation. So I appreciate that. And, we could spend an hour just discussing the backgrounds of the people on this screen and in this roundtable. So I direct you to their websites, which is on the speakers page for the forum. We want to tap, into the initial, or I should say, the rich experience of everybody that you're seeing on your screen right now. Because together, my feeling is that it takes folks like these very folks to realize the awesome and audacious goal of universal organic food production and landscape management. This is no longer a luxury, as you heard. This is a need, a necessity. So let me start with Linley Dixon, PhD, Dr. Dixon. Hello. Wow. Linley has really invested her life in organic, managing and owning and growing her farm over the last 10 years. It's really impressive. What I find Also impressive is the fact that she holds a doctorate in plant pathology from the University of Florida and a master's in soil scientist. What greater background could you have to go into this field? Of course, couldn't have a greater background. The beauty, though, is that Linley is really engaging in the policy arena as well and trying to grow organic. So we're really going to tap into her experience with the Real Organic project as a co-director. Real Organic is an add-on label on organic certification. We'll explain what that means. And they're working with Naturland, which you heard spoken about earlier with Felix's presentation. So thank you, Linley, for being here. Let's move over to Alan Lewis. Alan is an incredible source and font of knowledge in the organic community. He just happens to work for one of the best grocery stores west of the Mississippi, which is Natural Grocers. I don't know which is a sideline, Natural Grocers or the organic advocacy work that Alan does, because he's all over the place. Natural Grocers started in the 50s, 170 stores in 21 states. And Alan gives generously of his time and serves on boards from the Organic and Natural Health Association, has been on an advisory board to the Real Organic Project, American Grass-Fed Association, the Organic Farmers Association on policy work, and the Council for Responsible Nutrition. In addition to the International Federation of Organic Agriculture, IFOAM, which I guess is now called Organics International, the North American board. So if you want to look up the word networker in the dictionary, you're probably going to find Alan's picture. Thank you, Alan, for all that. And you testified last week, as I think you did as well, Linley, before the National Organic Standards Board, or was that 2 weeks ago? In any event, we are now moving on to Colehour Bondera, who I met sitting next to him on the National Organic Standards Board. And whenever we needed a great vote for small or family farmers questioning the necessity of a pesticide, Colehour could talk from experience on his farm, intensively managed on 5 acres. You know, when I saw that farm in the Philippines, it looked a lot like your farm, Colehour, so I'm sure you have a lot to say about that. Colehour has been involved with Kona Coffee Farmers Association and is really involved with American Origin Products and Origin, which is based in Geneva, Switzerland. And so he too has a wealth of experience, I think, that can help guide us as we think strategically about how to move forward. So I promised the group I would give them an opportunity, and I'm really interested to hear this, to get a bit about your reflections on what Felix had to say, given that I think there's a lot of, you know, simpatico feeling on what is important and what we need to do to move ahead. But given your experience, where you sit, and I know you, as I just explained, you wear a lot of different hats. What are your takeaways from his talk? I'll start with you, Linley.
Thanks, Jay. Well, I really related to the beginning when he was talking about biodiversity, because that's, you know, Real Organic Project is a movement of over 1,000 organic farmers, certified organic farmers, that have decided to do an extra certification, an add-on certification for the Real Organic label. And I got to be the one to travel the country in that first year, 6 years ago. After failed attempts at reform of the USDA, we realized this add-on was necessary, and I got to see these incredible organic farms. So the first thing I want to say is that we, as farmers, know how to farm organically. And there is a huge push out there to say organic can't feed the world, and that's what Felix was talking about. These are huge forces, and it's a very calculated strategy to confuse the public, that, you know, to scare the public, really, that we don't know what we're doing and that we'll all starve. And I think we need to start asking ourselves, how long do we want to be able to feed the world? And in that, you have to come back to organic because you don't have all of the, extra things that happen to the rest of the environment. And so what I saw was that a lot of our farmers perhaps had lower yields because they included so much biodiversity on their farms. So I think of visiting a grain farm, and they would have areas every 30 feet in their grain production for perennial strips. And what these perennial strips did, they would actually monitor migrating birds so that there was a place for them to come. And instead of the birds eating coated seed and then going off and dying, they had places to nest, and they were working with scientists to monitor this, members of the Xerces Society. So if you look at all of that land base, sure, that's what the chemical industry is going to say. Look, on 10,000 acres, they're producing less yield. But yield isn't what it's all about. What are we preserving on our farms? And what aren't we contaminating, including humans, right? He talked about all the cancer rates. So I just want to just put out there that they, have a very calculated, highly financed industry to try to stop organic farming because it hurts their bottom line. And we really have to be careful about regenerative, because as benign and wonderful as this part of the movement is, regenerative is also part of a very calculated effort to undermine organic and say we are better than organic. It doesn't matter that we use a few herbicides and pesticides here and there. We're regenerative farmers, and that does not work for eaters. Eaters do not want to be exposed to these things, and they also understand all the things that Felix was talking about. So continuous improvement is something that was always part of organic. I think that's went wrong, is we lost that ability for the National Organic Standards Board to really have a voice and continuous improvement in the sunset process. With inerts, all of these things that you're fighting for, Jay, these, we have a wonderful foundation that we don't want to start over 50 years ago and start over with regenerative and try to define it. I think we're going to end up with something that looks a lot like organic. And if we could just start now, we don't have the time to redefine it, right? And add some of these things. And when you look to Europe, these add-on labels are how they've been successful. So these are farmer-led, regionalized labels for integrity. And that's something that we missed in the US. We stopped we have CCOF and MAFCA and VOF all over the country. And when the USDA came in, those farmer-led movements stopped. And we all just said, okay, the USDA's got this now. We'll all follow the same standard. But we need to bring that concept back of continuous improvement back to organic. So
and
anyway,
that's a key word I think we're going to hear. We'll hear more about. And so Linley mentioned the California Certified Organic Farmers, CCOF, and MAVCA, Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association. They were the original labels certifying agencies before USDA got involved. So Alan, I'm going to turn to you and ask you the same question. Do you have any reflections on the talk and your takeaways?
Wow, I have a lot to say. I'm not exactly sure where to focus. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I really enjoyed reading Felix's book. I echo your comment, Jay, that it is thorough, it's comprehensive. It drops all of the pretenses and prejudices that we normally bring into the conversation, and really looks at the way human communities actually function and evolve. And I would add that I lived in Haiti for 2 years, and there's a chapter on Haiti and a lot of references in the 80s. I've gone back several times, most recently to the high hills and the coffee plantations and right before COVID. And when you look at regeneration and organic and indigenous agroecology, that's how these communities survive. That's how they're reorganizing, because everyone is preying on them, from the multinationals to the government to other entities that claim to be helping. So probably not the time to go in a couple of examples I've been involved in, but ultimately, Felix looks at that social dimension and he says, self-satisfaction, recognition of self-confidence that it's more attractive to live in the countryside and from agriculture. My point here would also be we need to let go of the habit of thinking that indigenous agriculture is unique to brown people overseas. What Linley is describing in North America with the Organic Project is indigenous communities and integrated economies that are bringing in the inherent indigenous practices that organic systems require. That is really interesting because so many people in North America from all backgrounds understand the corporations often don't have your back and that the government is often putting either piecemeal programs in that don't last and aren't really targeted or just outright predatory through the USDA. What's fascinating to see this country, the small conservative like white communities, to be blunt, or small communities across the US with a lot of different people in them, looking for that resilience. And that's where I hang my hat in terms of maintaining some optimism. I think my last comment here would be, I'm broadcasting here from the floor of Supply Side West, which is a global nutraceutical and food ingredient trade show in Las Vegas, 1,000 booths from all over the world. And I've figured out the code. If the booth says non-GMO, that means their technology is using synthetic biology. When Cargill and Bayer Monsanto and Corteva and ADM are all talking about being regenerative and talking about non-GMO, that means they've moved into synthetic biology and they're using regenerative as the catch-all cover for the new biggest lie. So we know who the bad actors are, in my opinion, but I don't think I'll get much agreement. And we know the code words that they're using. So in an hour, I'm presenting here on synthetic biology and explaining this to a kind of the core audience that if you want eaters/shoppers, consumers to know what to look for to support agroecology and understand the value of organic and why the North American standards need to be strengthened and broadened, you need to understand how synthetic biology is being hidden, how it's being forced into the market, undisclosed and without shoppers knowing or granting permission. So that's a lot of comments all at once.
Yeah.
But
I want to ask you
go ahead.
one other element here that I'd like to bring in, given that your employer is a retailer. I'm wondering, given that perspective, why do people shop at natural grocers?
A lot of reasons. Let me focus on the one that's most important. And I'll use an example. It's Thousand Hills, 100% grass-fed, grass-finished, pastured, AGA certified beef. We sell that hamburger at $8 a pound when other people were selling regular beef at $2 a pound or $4 a pound. So and it's the only hamburger that we sell. Now, suspend the problem that some people on the call might not want beef raised, but this is regenerating landscapes. It's putting money back at the farm gate. It's helping with succession planning, kids get an education, healthcare, all of the things, animal welfare, all the things that we value under Organics 3.0, social, economic, ecological. When you educate shoppers about the collateral benefits and stop talking about price and yield, they're more than happy to spend more money to support those, what you might call them subjective or tangential benefits that they actually find really important. I'm going to take the leap and tell you that our customers, 1 million or 2 million customers, are the people that are listening to this message that agroecology and organics and the new organization of agricultural communities is recognized, understood, and valued. So we successfully spend a lot of money educating our customers so that the true value of food suddenly makes sense. They know what they're supporting and they know what they're not supporting. Long answer, simple question.
No, that's very helpful. So Colehour, tell us, given your perspective, I know you are very involved with the agricultural community in Hawaii, and you work, as opposed to Alan, you're working through farmers markets and direct marketing. So, and you've also worked at the highest levels of government to see how we are struggling with growing organic or replicating organic, as Linley likes to say. I love that. Tell us your reflections, please, on Felix's work.
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate and thank Felix a presentation, because I think that was very helpful for us all. Like you said, we have a small scale diversified organic farm in Hawaii. And I think my whole desire and emphasis is to fit in with nature, to work with what's at hand locally. I say start at home. And at home on our farm, we have huge diversity. We have Kona coffee, avocados, cacao, bananas, citrus, things like lychee, lilikoi, tamarillos, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe my middle name is diversification, but mostly the question is, how else can we maintain a healthy whole system from farm to local to state to county to the world, to country to the world? And I think that my focus has been on biology, because it doesn't know lines of property ownership. Pests and diseases are constant, and I'm going to give you a little example for a moment, which is that coffee leaf rust, which is a fungus, was identified in Hawaii. And the question was, from my perspective, how to live with it rather than how to eliminate it. It's existed for 150 years around the world, but the emphasis of the university, cooperative extension, the United States Department of Agriculture researchers is how to work around it and not with the fungal pest. And so I want to first focus on the health of the soil and the trees to ward off damage. How can the trees live with this pest? And through the use of indigenous microorganisms and focus on Hawaii-produced organic fish-based fertilizers, it means that our carbon footprint is dramatically lighter than if we're importing to Hawaii even only the organic fertilizers. And the options for activating micronutrient uptake through access to facilitating flourishing microorganisms means that we can prepare the opportunities of indigenous microorganism formulations fed with farm-specific foundational materials. What makes sense about what I'm just said? Mostly that if we're not going to rely on imported chemical inputs, then we must begin to look around us and see what is already not being made use of. Things like farm-specific microorganisms or the wastes of the fishing industry, which are otherwise dumped back in the ocean. And this is based on organic systems models, and the hope in part is to affect the small-scale coffee farmers around me, most of whom are conventional, by showing the benefits of systems approaches and interest them in organics. Effort at the county level is intent to head to the state and then to the federal levels and beyond. And I think as a past member of the National Organic Standards Board, my humble opinion is that the NOSB, the National Organic Standards Board, should work with the National Organic Program and set up an achievable organic goal supported by all levels of government. And I'm just going to put this out there because I personally think a simple goal, something like 25% of US farms should be certified organic by 2035 in order to address climate change, to curb global warming. In my opinion, though this might be difficult, if we don't set goals, organics, which we all need, will not grow as we continue to tread along with the current system, which avoids changes. And I'll just wrap it up on that, which is that topic, which is that this might or might not make sense to everybody, but I just attended an NOSB meeting in Portland, Oregon, and the members were unwilling to vote to remove an unneeded synthetic from a list of exceptions that are permitted in organic. Members of the National Organic Standards Board want to keep all the tools in the tool bag and not do like like Linley mentioned, continuous improvement, which they're required to do. And at the meeting, there was no NOSB interest in taking action regarding making us all at peace with an established goal of requirements for seeds, that organic seeds should be required for producing organic. They were saying that perhaps in the future, perhaps seed requirements in 2035. I think that's too small of an initiative. We do not need to be using only organic seed by 2035, but we need to be set a starting goal for all organic farm certification. Now is the health and well-being moment for all of us to demand the setting of foundational standards from which to flourish. And while we might begin with each farm, like I started out by saying, and each consumer purchase choice is critical, I think we also have to have a commitment of the US government. And I just rally to all of you right at this moment. Together, we must stand and so demand. Thank you for that.
And that's a good segue. You know, there was a debate in the organic community when there was discussion around creating a USDA certified label as to whether that could be a trusted label when we were handing over literally an organic community. It wasn't quite an industry. It was on the edge of becoming an industry, to the jurisdiction control of USDA regulations. The way we thought about that at the time was we would create a board like the NOSB, the National Organic Standards Board, and that would be a board of stakeholders that would have certain authorities that go beyond typical advisory boards, particularly around what inputs would be allowed in organic, essentially. And you're right, it all comes down to the individuals that are on that board and, you know, who they are accountable to. So I think I want to lay the groundwork here that, you know, we discussed this a little bit with Felix. The EU has allocated about 12 billion euros in 2014 through 2022 to grow the organic sector. So there is that commitment you're talking about, which could be adopted by USDA, could be adopted by even at the White House level as a part of an executive order that it, you know, governs what federal agencies do. We could establish a mandate of that sort and recognize the multidimensional benefits of organic, from health to biodiversity to climate. The question, though, I guess, is, and you all have attended NOSB meetings, you've interacted with individuals. There are ebbs and flows. When you and I, Colehour, are on the board, we had a supermajority to move in directions that we wanted to, and that's changed over time in different timeframes. What do we need to do to engage the public? I mean, Alan, you said that you have an informed public. They understand what they're investing in when they buy organic, their health, the environment, the future for their kids. What do we need to do to get people to recognize that, yeah, that organic label has value? And I really don't want to leave the impression that it doesn't have value, because all the chemicals that the environmental community fights on, glyphosate, neonicotinoids, paraquat, go down the list, are not allowed in organic. So just as a baseline, we're better off, right? The question is, how do we get the public, all those millions of people that are buying it, what did you say? 2 million, whatever, people at grocers?
Yeah.
How do we get them
customers,
engaged in this policy, this wonky policy stuff?
It's important to understand the core challenge, which is the consolidation of food retailer of Target, Costco, Walmart, Sam's Club, Kroger, Safeway, Albertsons. I think it's 12 companies control or exercise control over 65% of retail food sales. And all of those companies that I mentioned, 95% of what they sell is what our community would call junk, heavily processed, a lot of sketch ingredients that aren't supporting health, that are causing problems in the food, air, and water, and in the microbiome, et cetera, just nutrient deficient foods. Our challenge is that those companies can't promote organic and agroecological ingredients in food products, because then it triggers their customers to question the value of everything else on the shelf. When you talk about organic Oreos or Doritos or milk, and people start questioning the source of $3 a gallon conventional milk, and food that's highly processed and overseas and full of artificial sugars or GMO sugar, whatever, that's not something that a key set of constituents are willing or able to do. Costco's not going to heavily promote the benefits of true grass-fed organic meats, because 97% of what they sell is highly questionable. It looks weird, it smells weird, and when you look at the processes that those animals are raised on, there's nothing that's defensible. So sorry to
Can we break
twist your collection around, but that's our core challenge. So
yeah. So let me just jump. We can come back to this, but jump to Linley, because I think, when we think about organic farming, we think about family farmers. At least most of us do. We're learning that there is industrial organic, and while they may follow the letter of the law, they really are engaged in practices that were not part of the initial principles and values of organic, which really did embrace family farming. So the close relationship that helped build organic, define organic, market organic between consumers and farmers sort of gets lost in what Alan's talking about and in the way we buy our food and how we buy our food. Does that make sense? And can we sort of, what do we need to do to bring that coalition back together and raise that voice? Or maybe it is happening.
Yeah, no, the vast majority of farmers, there's about 20,000 farmers under the USDA organic seal. The vast majority of them are family farms. It's just that we've lost that shelf space for their products. So they're really struggling right now. And I think we need to come together under things like antitrust. That's got to be a huge part of the conversation, right? Driscoll's owns 70% of the organic berry market. How is a seasonal, nutritious, tasty berry going to make the shelf right now when Driscoll's dominates it and doesn't want you there, right? And they're dominating the price point too. So antitrust is a big part of it. But Europe, the goals that Colehour was talking about, Europe's done it. They've set these goals, and they did it through coalitions. So it's not just about the organic movement. It's about finding all the environmental groups out there to come together and lobby for organic. And that's what we need to do here. I think it's going to be a lot harder to do here, because I believe the chemical industry has gone into the Sierra Club, right? And changed the story, because they're saying we've got to rewild and farm on less acres. And so we need that chemical agriculture to do that. Well, we're poisoning the rest of the area that we're going to rewild when we do that. So we need to figure out how to farm with nature, right? Going back to those same stories. But if we come together and have huge coalitions, that's how they've been effective in Europe. And the idea of saving these farms, we need another lane to differentiate family, principled, organic agriculture. And that's what these add-on labels have been really successful doing in Europe.
So explain the add-on for a minute. Many people may not understand. Adding on to what, and what is the baseline, and so forth.
So you have to be certified organic to get a Naturland label, to get the Real Organic Project label. These are called add-on labels. You have to be certified organic first. And Naturland has a standards board we mimicked, because they're a 30, 40-year-old program. We mimicked what they're doing. It's all farmer-led. Let's see. Boy, many of you have been on our standards board. So the farmers, when they were part of these original organic movements, they were the ones setting the standards, because they know what they're capable of doing on the farm, and they're incredibly principled. That's why they got into organic farming in the first place. So they're constantly pushing themselves to do better, and pushing each other to do better. So when they gather and create standards that are based on their experimentation in the field, it pushes the bar forward. So we need to get farmer engagement back, but we can't do it alone. We need support of the eaters to support this concept. You know, there's that story of the farmer, the tractorcade, where the farmers, you know, went into Washington, D.C. and tried to change the system because the family farmers were really struggling and dying. And the eaters didn't join them. And so it ultimately wasn't successful. And in spite of the fact that they made a lot of news stories, they weren't successful. So we need a larger movement. We need coalitions right now behind organic.
Colehour, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think I actually in no way want to contradict anything that was said so far, but I think my thinking in terms of this subject area first goes to the concept of local. And I really think I think when Alan was talking, he was mentioning something that I think is critical, which is that especially in schools at like the school district level and eating local food, and even in stores where people seek specific local things, and I think it ranges around the world where you are, but it always includes produce, but it, you know, like in the case of Hawaii, they're looking for coffee, etc. I think that people are looking for local, and I think that the interesting thing with that is that many of the people involved in providing local products in different ways aren't certified organic. And so I think the question then becomes, you know, how to engage and activate these people into the broader coalition process that's, you know, associating local groups between local conditions. And I think that that's really, in my opinion, the critical process, which is starting small and growing big, because I think a lot of those local activities are already occurring, frankly. But I think I agree with Linley that we just don't have the coordination or orchestrator to bring us together in an effective means. And I think that is a necessary step.
You know,
Can I add on to that
go,
for you?
Go for it.
Absolutely right on, Linley Colehour. We all need to pay close attention to rural sociology and the political economics of what we refer to as the heartland, which may include the 1 acre lot or one small home lot in the middle of a big city, or a town of 25 or 500 somewhere out in rural America. There's a beautiful word called the ecotone. Ecotone is where two ecological systems are interacting. It may be where a forest turns into desert. It also means where grassland turns into bushes, turns into forest. But what I see and study and participate in is these communities that are seeking their own resilience and sovereignty. And it crosses political and ideological bounds because they are trying to build something. Their motto in general is turn off the national news, talk to your neighbor about fixing where you live. And resilience and independence is supremely important to everyone. I'm mentioning this because if you're looking for inspiration, go to the Rural Grocery Summit or an extension event where small communities are fundamentally rebuilding their own economic system so that it's interdependent. And again, indigenous with a small I. This is happening. It's energized. There's language around it. There's political organization around it. And it harkens back to that original idea of organic, which was community embedded agriculture built on trust and best practices. So sorry for the speech, but it's really encouraging.
I wanted, in light of community-based action, I wanted to bring in Chip Osborne from Osborne Organics because, you know, we took the principles of organic land management and expanded it out to parks, playing fields, gardens, and so forth. And, you know, it's really interesting because this is a perfect way to educate communities and people about what organic means, and then they can apply that to their community, right, in terms of how they're managing land, but also to what they buy in the food store and who they support in terms of at the farmer's market. And growing the movement as a comprehensive, holistic movement. So Chip and I met, I don't know, 18 years ago, somewhere in there. He had been in Marblehead, Massachusetts, working with activists. He's a 50-year horticulturist, and he passed in Marblehead, Massachusetts, the first restriction on pesticides adoption of organic practices under the public health code. Under the public health code, the elected officials recognized this was a way to protect the health of their community. And Chip has the benefit when he goes out to communities and talks to parks departments, explaining that he is or has been both an elected official on his Parks Commission, and he works on land management, organic land management systems. So I just wanted to ask Chip to say a few words as we take the principles of organic and apply organic land management and agriculture and apply them very broadly across all land management. If you have any reflections on Felix's talk, that would be wonderful.
Sure, thanks, Jay. Quite a few parallels between Felix and myself in that both of us started conventionally and then moved into organic. And the principles and practices that he talked about in organic agriculture directly relate to what we do together at Beyond Pesticides in our Sustainable Parks program in guiding municipalities to move away from synthetic pesticides and petroleum-based fertilizers. So between organic land management and organic agriculture, very strong parallels. We don't try to teach people a product swap. We're not putting out a silver bullet approach. We're not picking a better product over one we decide that, has some issues to it. We embrace a systems-based approach that involves soil, particularly the health of the soil and the living fraction of the soil, the cultural practices, product inputs. It all begins with soil testing. In my mind and opinion, and my colleagues will say that dirt is sand, silt, and clay, but soil is sand, silt, and clay with an organic matter fraction and microbial life. So we do soil testing, but not just the conventional kind where we look at nutrients, but we put that soil under a microscope and we identify exactly what's going on there. And we work to understand natural soil functions and optimize those functions. That guides us into the development of a transitional plan. We work with land managers to reorient their conventional approach. We try to unlearn what they have been taught from the conventional side, encourage them to embrace a holistic approach. So we're teaching and educating because that really is the key to success in the future. We're teaching them to feed the soil, not the plant, focusing on plant and soil health. Colehour said it, not focusing on killing pests, focusing on building a healthy ecosystem. Most importantly, we work to get community buy-in. The support of elected officials, critically important. So we're taking this outside of a park department or a school district and embracing the whole community. Teaching that it's a broad program that encompasses the protection of children's health, workers, birds, bees, protection of water, ties in with the community's climate action plan, carbon sequestration, we heard about that, photosynthesis, ending up with carbon in the atmosphere, carbon sequestered in the soil. So our organic land management practices bring all of this together. I'm a 20-year, recently retired elected official managing budgets. So cost is always an issue when we talk about these transitions. But in my community, as Jay said, when this regulation went in place over 20 years ago, the community put a value on health and safety, particularly of our children that were using the athletic fields. So it wasn't just the cost of what we were using as product inputs, but it was that as an offset against overall cost benefits when we're reducing and eliminating chemical use. When we embark on an organic plan, we do get cost benefits over time. We embrace the natural cycling of nitrogen. We get a reduction in product input over time. Resilience builds in the plant. We're able to stand up to pests without introducing pesticides. And we have less water use once we get to the 3 or 4 year point. So lots of benefits to the community over the long haul. So, just wrapping it up, our goal is to get the community invested in organic, not just in organic agriculture and the food they eat, but in their living space and how they choose to manage both public and private spaces. We teach that the approach can be successful, just like we've heard the successes of organic agriculture, that we can produce the desired results and leave the community in a healthier place.
Thank you, Chip. So just so folks know out there, we do have this program where we work with Chip and go into communities and actually work with parks departments. You can find it at Parks for Sustainable Future on our website. Linley, thank you, Chip. Felix said something that farmers have told me, and I've learned from Chip over the years, and that inputs, when we talk about inputs in organic, we're talking about inputs that strengthen defenses, create more resiliency in the plant or resilience in the plant, rather than focusing on killing things. And yet, he also mentioned that, and I think we've all experienced this, that the academic institutions, even the one you got a degree from, talks about plant pathology, not plant health. Stuart Hill, for those of you who knew him when he was in the US or Australia, used to say we should rename all the plant pathology departments in the US to plant health departments, just because the focus is on killing rather than in strengthening defenses. So how do we broaden that concept out? And have you seen that conversation that Felix mentioned?
Okay, I have a lot to say. I'm going to give everybody who's still here a little piece of candy. When I studied a fungus that infected plants, it resided as an endophyte first. And this was actually a beneficial fungus inside of the plants. And only when the plant was stressed did it cause disease, right? So I can completely relate to what you're saying. The pesticide industry knows this. Probably 40 years ago, they funded research, and this came out of the University of Florida, did some of this research where I got my degree, to actually show that when you add more fertilizers, you get higher yields, because they wanted to sell their fungicides and then bactericides, all their pesticides. So if you actually apply more fertilizers, you're going to need all of their products because your plant is going to be really sick. And so this is this treadmill that we're stuck in. And the industry knows this, right? They're just profiting off of it. So we need to get back to an ecological understanding. And it's not good bugs and bad bugs, right? And the same is in our body too. When you get stressed, when you get weakened, and you're not eating healthy food that comes from healthy soils that have maybe been exposed to some of these pathogens and endophytes hanging out, their defenses are lifted. And so they've got like thousands of metabolites that are exposed because they've been exposed to an insect bite here and there. We just have to get back to our understanding of the interconnectedness of all things to our health. So that's an assignment for you all, is to get more education in the interconnectedness of all things. And it really comes back to planetary health.
So you're familiar with the operations of an organic farm, and one of the elements that we talk about in differentiating organic from all these other terms, regenerative, et cetera, is the fact that there's certification and there are inspections of the farm. Are we getting enough out of that inspection system to identify whether the soil management plan and these practices you talk about to build the biology, are we doing enough to evaluate, and do we have enough knowledge so that we are teaching more and more people how to avoid the need for these chemicals that kill, as opposed to building the strength? Because I'll be honest, when I sat on the NOSB, if a farmer had access, and this could be an organic farmer, to an input that we would rather them not use, and we knew of farmers that were not using it, the farmer that is using that material that's allowed is wedded to that material and gets no assistance, as far as we could tell, to make that transition in a way and learn from that other farmer who never needed to use that material because of the practices they were using.
Yeah, we need to get back to the gold standard being no inputs, going back to your original question. They're simply not needed. And if you have a healthy system, which sometimes it takes, they say 3 to 5 years when you're transitioning away from all of these inputs for your system to start working. But that's, why we need programs to support those farmers in transition. But once they become organic, we actually need to support them there too in the marketplace.
Exactly.
But absolutely, we know how to do this. And I'll just say I've experienced this on my own farm. It takes a little while for you to see the cycling of the organic matter start to work so that you really are growing your own fertility, your own inputs on your farm, and then you don't need anything else. That is the gold standard, not no-till. That's all herbicide based, right? The gold standard is reducing your inputs off the farm.
Yeah. So my question, and maybe we can, really think about this as we close out this session today. We know we have the skill set. We know we understand. We have scientists like Linley. We've got incredible scientists like you're incredible, other incredible scientists like Felix, who know what we need to do. We've got a structure in place that defines organic. It's pretty decent. We don't have enough pressure on the decision makers from the public that is spending money, hard-earned money, as Alan said, to invest in the organic system. They believe in it not only for their own health, but they do believe in it for the protection of workers who are no longer exposed to these toxic, the protection of waterways, the protection of ecosystems. So we have historically worked with farm worker organizations who realize the benefits of organic for them. We work with landscapers who realize, hey, I'm benefiting. When Chip Osborne sets up a program in my community, I'm benefiting from that. I'm no longer exposed. But so we've got all these pieces. They're all chugging along, but we've got these crises coming down at us, and we're just not moving fast enough, right? So what do you say? I mean, Linley, you're involved with the day-to-day of managing a farm. You can't ask much more of you, even though you're co-director of the Real Organic Project, which is doing a fantastic job. Colehour I've been there when he's running on a Saturday morning to set up the farmer's market and get the whole place going and, get all the products in the car down to the market. It's hard to ask more of farmers. Alan's running all over the country, preaching the gospel and getting on boards to redirect their understanding. How does this all come together? How are we going to make this happen on a timeline that is fast approaching us?
Jay, let me try to answer that quickly and piggyback on Linley's comment. When you provide the wrong nutrients to crops and those crops respond with their innate genetics in negative ways, that's the same parallel to what we're doing to our kids for the last 2 generations. We're feeding them and exposing them to toxicants and overprocessed food and who knows what else. And our innate genetics is responding to that and creating an autoimmune response, various different diseases and behaviors and mental health issues. The key moment of energy for change and the moral courage for change is when people realize that it's the toxicants that are causing this massive decay in public health. That's where we can communicate to our customers the value of organic, the value of CHIPS program, which our customers were happy to fund hundreds of thousands of dollars because they get it. There's so much energy and moral courage. It's one by one, we're creating a movement, and everyone should really, it's tempting to be defeatist on those bad days, but there's so much energy towards the goals that we've agreed on here.
Yeah. Have you all seen these issues integrated into political campaigns? Is your local, when your local elected official, be it at the county council, town council, city council, state level, and then up to Congress, are they talking these issues?
I'll be
Not in
honest,
my world.
they're
Linley?
using the word regenerative, and it's painful. They need to be using the word organic. We have a
Yeah.
wonderful woman who's gotten organic parks in our community, and so it can happen. We just need to get behind the word organic, because regenerative doesn't have a definition that doesn't include these toxic substances.
Yeah.
And I agree, but I think that the problem with the political experiences that I've had with politicians at the county and state level, even the national level to some degree, is that they want to use that problem approach, which is a focus on a single component, like a single material. Like we're going to ban Roundup on county roads, for example. And that's good. You can't say that's not good, because it opens up the door. But at the same time, it's not a systems concept, and it's not thinking about the whole picture. It's just a piecemeal approach. So I think I have not experienced
One of the things I learned
politicians
in
that
sort of
level.
preparing for this meeting and talking to Felix is that, and this is true with nature or Naturland, that they had a very strong coalition with environmental organizations, very strong. They were walking in lockstep. We do not have that in this country, believe it or not. Let's be clear, we do not have our national environmental groups, for the most part, there are some exceptions, walking in lockstep with organic farmers. We still view organic in this country as a luxury good and not a necessity to preserve our future and to protect the legacy of life. So, or to protect our families from all the adverse effects that we experience. That we can demand. I dare say there are numerous people on this call who are members of environmental organizations. Are you asking those environmental organizations that you support, do they support organic? Are they going to the National Organic Standards Board meeting? Are they submitting comments to the USDA on rulemaking around organic standards? These are things we can do. We are powerful individually. The Durango folks were a bunch of parents that, went in there and got got organic parks going. We have seen individuals turning communities around. The information's available. I mean, look at the experts we have on this call. They have phone lines, and I hate to put this out there, but they're willing to talk to folks. We, of course, are set up to do that. And so let's use our own individual power and not feel like we need this group to move something ahead. We are empowered and have been empowered to do this. I find this meeting today extremely empowering. So, I know what I need to do, but I hope we can take the couple of hundred people that were in and out of this meeting and use the power that we have. And maybe we'll add a session or a part of the session on November 14th to ask that very question. How do we use our power most effectively? But I really deeply appreciate what you all are doing individually and collectively. And the key here is that I think you all are powerful people. You guys, as panelists, you are powerful. You've taken problems into your own hands and found solutions. But you've gone beyond that. You've joined with others. You've taken that experience and educated beyond your individual farm, your individual community. And so that's what we all need to be doing. And we all can do that. We all have a role to play. So that's my closing comment. Does anybody else have a closing comment they'd like to share with the group?
Short.
Yeah.
One little thing you can do if you see the word regenerative in any local policies, anything national, lobby to get it switched to organic. The pesticide industry loves that word because they can play too.
Great. Okay, people. We'll see you down the road. Keep on going. We're gonna win this. And thank you
Thank
all
you,
for those
Jay.
who
Thank you.
participated. Yeah, thank you. Thank you
Thanks,
for
Jay.
all who participate in this conference. We really depend on you to make the changes that we need. So we'll see you November 14th.
Aloha.
Hello.
Mahalo.